I'm going to tell you what 5 of the most common reasons are for asylum rejections so that you can avoid them and win your asylum case. I'm Brian Manning, and I used to be an asylum officer with the government, but now as an asylum lawyer, I help immigrants all over the country to secure their future in America through asylum. Now, in my time as an asylum officer and now as an asylum lawyer, I've seen a lot of patterns emerge, including some of the same problems that keep cropping up and causing people to lose their asylum case. And there are 5 that I've seen over and over again about which you need to be aware. That way, you can guard against these pitfalls. Stay with me to the end because it's especially important that you know about the 5th rejection reason. Ready? Okay, so here we go. The top 5 asylum rejection reasons. Number 1, the 1-year filing deadline. There's a rule that says you need to apply for asylum during your first year in the United States, and that if you apply after that year, well, you can't get asylum. This rule trips up lots of people. There are tons of denials because people just don't know asylum is an option, or maybe they don't know how to go about applying for it. To be more precise, the rule says you have to apply within 1 year of your most recent entry to the United States. So if you've been in the country previously, we're not concerned with that. None of that counts for purposes of determining whether your application is timely filed under the 1-year filing deadline. The time frame that matters is just the time since your most recent entry. So if the government accepts your application outside of the 1-year deadline, well, you're ineligible for asylum, unless you qualify for an exception. There are 2 categories of exceptions. One's called the extraordinary circumstances exception, and the other is the changed circumstances exception. Those are kind of complicated. If you've been in the United States more than a year and you're considering applying for asylum, well, I urge you to talk to an asylum lawyer to see if you might qualify for an exception to the 1-year filing deadline. All right, number 2, severity. What does that mean? Well, to win your case, you have to convince the asylum officer that you've been persecuted in the past or that there's a good chance that you'll be persecuted in the future. So what does persecution mean? Well, that word isn't defined in the immigration laws or rules, so it's kind of up for debate. Essentially, it means very serious harm. You see, you've got to convince the asylum officer that what you've endured or what you're likely to face in the future is so bad, so severe, that it rises to the level of persecution. And this can be tough to do. Harm that seems really bad to you might not be bad enough in the officer's judgment to count as persecution under the asylum laws. So you've got to explain your case in a way that illustrates just how bad things have been and will be for you. You do this through your written case materials, and particularly the personal statement that you should submit with your asylum application, and through the testimony that you'll give at your asylum interview. And there's an art to framing and presenting your case in a way that shows the officer that you meet all the asylum requirements, including this persecution element, which is done by convincing the officer that the harm is sufficiently severe to count as persecution. Okay, on our list of the top 5 asylum rejection reasons, we've come to number 3, which is inclination. Before I tell you about that, if you want to maximize your chances for asylum success, then be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell notification so you don't miss the insights that I share on this channel. All right, what is inclination? Well, there's an element of the asylum eligibility analysis that's forward-looking, where the officer is asking this question: is someone really that likely to persecute you in the future? In other words, is there someone out there, whether it's the government or a private actor, who's inclined to do something really bad to you? If you can't convince the officer that there exists this inclination to persecute you, then you probably won't win asylum. And this is why a lot of cases are lost. The asylum officer may think, well, yeah, I know you've had some problems and maybe you've been threatened or harassed, but I haven't seen anything to suggest that someone's actually going to kill you or do the things that you're saying these people will do to you if you have to go back to your country. Asylum officers often think that threats are empty, that people making them are all talk, and that, well, if they haven't already taken action to kill the asylum applicant, then why would they do so in the future? I know, that logic is suspect, but I promise you, it's how a lot of asylum officers think. So the burden is on you to highlight all the facts and circumstances that can convince the decision maker that, yes, in fact, you're at grave risk, that there's a good chance that someone will persecute you, that someone is inclined to persecute you. Next up, number 4 is Nexus. Now, in the asylum context, this is basically a fancy word for motive or reason. And the question here is, What's motivating the bad guys? Because you see, it's not enough to convince the asylum officer that you're in danger. Rather, you've also got to convince them that the reason, or at least one of the main reasons, that someone is targeting you is the fact that you possess one of the so-called protected characteristics under US asylum law. What are these 5 protected characteristics, also called the protected grounds? Well, they're your race, religion, nationality, political opinion, and something called membership in a particular social group. To win asylum, you've got to show the officer that it's one of those things that's spurring the persecutors to harm you. How do you do this? Well, again, it's largely about how you explain your case, how you marshal the facts in your application materials and during your asylum interview. It comes down to your ability to recognize the favorable aspects of your case and then use them to paint a clear picture for the officer. One that shows that you meet all the qualifications for asylum, including the one that says that, well, you've got to show that the persecution is motivated by one of the 5 protected characteristics that you possess, or at least that the persecutors have attributed to you. And note that you may also need to use country of origin information, also referred to as country conditions information, to convince the officer both that you're at risk of being persecuted and that if the persecution occurs, it will be on account of or motivated by one of the 5 protected grounds. In doing this, using country of origin information effectively is where an asylum lawyer may really be able to give you an advantage in your case. Okay, we've made it to number 5, credibility. I've seen many asylum applications denied because the officer doesn't find them credible. Here's how it works. If the officer thinks you're lying, they can deny your case, but only if they can actually point to specific things about your case that look suspect. They can't just say, well, I've got a bad feeling about this one, or this guy seems like he's lying. Rather, to deny you on credibility grounds, they have to point to things about your case that are either not plausible or that are inconsistent. Something that's implausible is something that just literally cannot happen. Like if you said, well, space aliens abducted me and told me the government's going to arrest me. The officer would consider this to be implausible, i.e. not possible. Any assertions you make that are implausible will hurt your case and may get you denied. But much more common than implausibilities are inconsistencies. What's an inconsistency? It's when something you've said or something you've provided in writing for your case doesn't line up with something else that you've said or written. If you make contradictory statements, well, this would be an inconsistency. For example, if in your personal statement you said 4 guys attacked you, but then in your interview when discussing this incident, you said it was 3 guys. Well, this would be an inconsistency. And when there are multiple inconsistencies in your case, the officer can say that you're not credible and can therefore deny your application. But what's tough is that even people who are telling the truth sometimes get hurt by this. The officer either thinks incorrectly that the person is lying, or they really don't even believe that, but they just want an excuse to deny the person. So they play word games and try to confuse the applicant, so they'll have these inconsistencies in their case. And to be clear, you can't just go into your asylum interview thinking, well, I'm going to tell the truth, so I don't need to worry about the officer thinking that I'm lying. That's not a good approach. Instead, you've got to practice for your asylum interview and take other steps, which I explained in other videos and which I help my clients to take, to ensure that your case is bulletproof. To make it essentially impossible for the officer to miraculously find these inconsistencies in your case. Above all, yes, do tell the truth. Be honest and open and forthcoming. But you need to go a step further and prepare in a way that will leave no room for the officer to even suspect that there are inconsistencies. And if you're ready to take the next step and get individualized help with your asylum case, then call my office today. The number is 713-909-0401. Remember, we help people all over the country, so it doesn't matter where you are. Call us now to schedule an asylum strategy session so we can help you secure your future in America through asylum. Again, I'm Brian Manning, and it's an honor to serve you in your asylum journey.